Good morning and welcome to another Streaming Media Connect event, Streaming Media East Connect 2021. I'm Eric Schumacher-Rasmussen. I'm the editor and VP of Streaming Media, and we are thrilled to have you all here for another virtual event. I got to be honest with you, we're even more thrilled that we're playing an in-person event for Huntington Beach for Streaming Media West for November. So keep your eye open for the information about that. The website's already up and we have begun planning for a little time at the beach in person, if, as a friend of mine from down south used to say, Lord willing and the creek don't rise. But for Streaming Media East Connect, this is our biggest Streaming Media Connect yet. We've got 33 panels and presentations covering everything from production, encoding, and advertising technology to 5G, all manner of OTT related topics. It's really got a little bit of everything for everyone. And as always, all of our sessions will be available in the archives on Streaming Media's YouTube channel, and we'll be posting shortcuts, clips from these sessions on streamingmedia.com over the next few months. I'd like to thank OpenExchange, who is the sponsor of today's research keynote session, and they made this discussion possible. We've got a short video we'd like to share from OpenExchange now.
COVID-19 has posed a unique series of challenges and opportunities for the investor relations community. It's remarkable. Now more than ever, investor information has kept moving, and the resilience and transparency of the world's public companies has set a new standard for decades to come. Public and private companies who've started virtualizing their roadshows, investor days, and earnings calls noticed something remarkable when they did. Remote attendance skyrocketed. Meeting efficiency increased. Deals closed in record time, all while maintaining unparalleled investor relationships. So now the question becomes, how will companies continue to reap the full benefits of video and virtual meetings and conferences to foster richer, more interactive investor communications? The answer lies with a uniquely specialized partner like OpenExchange, the premier provider of video solutions for the financial industry. OpenExchange is the essential platform to host, manage, and improve Investor Day sessions, quarterly earnings announcements, annual meetings, and non-deal roadshows. Our advanced technology and experienced video specialists ensure secure, reliable connections, regardless of technology or location. Our live and on-demand video streaming delivers company information and insight to tens of thousands of simultaneous viewers. And our network of more than 100,000 endpoints means we can originate video meetings, streams, and even complex conferences from anywhere in the world. Secure, reliable, trusted. That's what makes OpenExchange the premier video partner for the world's largest financial institutions. And it's what keeps the world's investor communications flowing face-to-face, even when face-to-face isn't possible.
In addition to describing what OpenExchange does, that video does a great job of setting the stage for the conversation that we're about to have. We all know that, well, we've heard it ad nauseum in the last 15 months, that the last year has been unprecedented. And nothing has changed more than the way we work. And that is why Streaming Media, Unisphere Research, and OpenExchange partnered to do this survey on the State of Enterprise Video 2021. Talking about how people are using enterprise video for all of the purposes that were discussed in that video and more, and talking about how they're going to be using it in the future. And so I'd like to welcome my co-presenters today, Help Me Stream Research Foundation founder and Streaming Media contributing editor, Tim Siglin. Hey, Tim, how are you this morning?
Hey, I'm doing well, Eric. And you notice I'm not sitting in front of a giant map of the world like normal. I have a small one here in the corner.
Is that because enterprise video has shrunk our world, Tim?
Sure, we can say that.
Okay.
Actually, I'm coming to you from the East Tennessee State University Innovation Lab, where I'm actually doing a little bit of work this morning as well. So glad to be on.
Glad to have you here. And OpenExchange Chief Content Officer, Michael Kolowich. Michael, how are you doing?
I am doing great. Thank you very much. And I'm coming to you from the mountains of Vermont.
And are you actually in an outside broadcast truck or?
Well, that's a picture of our broadcast truck, but no.
Okay. So let's start before we jump into the actual presentation. Maybe Tim, you could set the stage a little bit and talk about how we put together the survey, what kind of information we were going for and how we executed it.
Absolutely. So we had 301 responses, quality responses on this particular survey. We hadn't done an enterprise video survey in probably 4 years. And so first of all, it was time to do one to sort of gauge what had changed. But secondly, as you mentioned with COVID, we wanted to not just see how people are using video when they're working from home for enterprise, but also what their thoughts were on how frequently they'll use video sort of post-pandemic. So what we looked at along with Michael, and Michael's very helpful in sort of framing the questions, we looked at a number of big areas. First of all, what platforms do people use? Secondly, what are the feature sets that they want? Third, how do they consume content? And fourth, what were their expectations for they themselves personally, as well as for their organizations? And Michael, just a quick question to you. What were some of the reasons that you all wanted to sponsor this? What were you looking to get out of it?
We were really looking to get 3 things out of it. One was to really quantify just how enterprise video usage has changed during the pandemic. But secondly, to distinguish enterprise video habits from online video viewing for personal consumption. I think too often, the statistics and surveys conflate the two. And our suspicion, our hypothesis was that enterprise video viewing habits are really, really different. The devices they use, et cetera, are really, really different from personal viewing habits. And we wanted to be able to quantify that. And then third, we wanted to look at early indications of what a new normal might look like for enterprise video post-pandemic.
And I know there are a number of big consulting firms that are also trying to figure that out, whether it's Gartner, Informa, others like that. Before the survey data came to you, what was your general sense as to what the new normal was going to look like?
Well, before the survey, we've been actually talking to a number of the research firms, and they actually admitted to being blindsided by the onset of the pandemic, and so they actually are scrambling a lot for research themselves. But our hypothesis has been that we saw a swing from fairly modest enterprise video usage to 100% in some types of applications.
Sure.
And the question was, how far was the pendulum going to swing back? And that really is, in many ways, the $10 billion question, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know if we can answer all 10 billion of it, but I think we can get to at least 100 million or so with today's data. So Eric, go ahead and bring the first slide up here. Actually, I guess it would be slide 3 is the one we're looking for. So here, to Michael's point, here's one of the things that we asked. We said, okay, you consume content, everybody consumes online media content these days. But how does it differ in the way that you consume it on devices for your own personal consumption versus business consumption? And what this graph shows, if you look at the lighter color, this is personal. And you can see personal is fairly fragmented across desktop, laptop, OTT boxes, smartphones, a little bit of tablet, and smart TV. What's really striking here, though, is that on the business side, you have 2 categories, desktop, laptop. And when you look at the rest of those other categories, there's hardly any consumption in that. Michael, I'm going to go to the next slide in just a minute, but does this surprise you in terms of the hypothesis of the difference between the way that business consumption is done versus standard personal media consumption?
Directionally, it doesn't surprise me, but I think the magnitude of the shift is really what is surprising. we've talked a lot over the years about kind of mobile first for video, really developed for mobile first. But for enterprise applications, that may not quite be the case yet. We're living in a desktop, laptop viewing world, and this states it pretty clearly.
And I will add one thing. Having done the previous survey a couple of years ago, what surprised me was, as you said, the shift to mobile has not really happened. A lot of people, even in that previous survey, said road warrior, road warrior, road warrior, meaning they wanted to be able to consume it from the road. But it seems like the consuming from the road is more a laptop than it is a cellular device like a smartphone or tablet. Eric, if you go to
let me just interject there as well. I mean, you say consuming from the road. No one was consuming from the road in very few people were actually consuming from the road in the last year. And so I wonder if once people return to the road, if we're going to see an uptick in mobile consumption. So many people over the last year brought their offices home with them, so their laptop was always with them, right? Their notebook was always with them. And that's obviously, if you got, the notebook, that's an easier way to view any sort of video, or certainly enterprise video, particularly when you have to interact, respond to polls and that sort of thing.
And you do you're right, you do tend to go to the largest screen that you have. And so from that standpoint, that's true. This slide, this is actually raw analysis that I did, so it doesn't look pretty like the way that the graphic design team laid it out. But I wanted to show this just to make a point. If you look at business at the bottom, the blue on the left is desktops. And you notice above that in personal, the blue, or where the blue in business is, covers all desktop, all laptop, and all gaming console personal consumption. And then the entire rest of the business part, the green, runs almost all the way out to the end for laptops, where you see in the consumer model, there are a number of different fragmentations: OTT boxes, smartphones, tablets, and smart TVs. And I think that's sort of a key point.
Let me just make one more point, really following up on something that Eric suggested, which is kind of during the pandemic, when we're not on the road and things like that. Of course, we're going to be using, desktop and laptop computers. But this drove me back to the Google Analytics for our platform, for the Novio online platform. And I wanted to see kind of whether this use of desktop and laptop computers versus mobile devices was different before the pandemic and during the pandemic. And it actually had only moved about 2 points, about 2 percentage points. So I have a feeling that this actually is something that is not pandemic driven, but is just native usage reflected here.
And Michael, I will say, in having seen other studies pre-pandemic, smartphone at the most made up about 10%. So yeah, I'm not surprised when you say that desktop and laptop. Now, I suspect there's more of a move toward laptop. What we'll see is laptop each share into the desktop portion, but not necessarily change the last 10% of this graph to the right, where smartphone, tablet, smart TV, et cetera. So.
And Tim, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because Bill Barron just mentioned in the chat that, I think the business survey should not consider a laptop versus desktop, but a computer at a desk versus a computer at a different location. Right. I use my laptop at my desk in my office as my main computer. And I think we've seen a trend towards that, whether they're connecting it to a larger screen or not.
Right. No, that's a valid point, in the fact that sort of what your primary device is. Now, I would assume many office-bound people, it's desktop only, but for those who have jobs that also require them to travel, they would be using their laptop, quote unquote, as a desktop when they're back in the office. So fair point. All right, let's go on to the next slide. This one's fascinating to me because this is definitely a shift from a couple of years ago. a couple of years ago, the Microsoft Windows portion of the operating system for online enterprise video consumption was up in the 78 to 80%. What we see here is that it's dropped some. The Mac operating system, surprisingly, has risen quite dramatically. I think when we did this a couple of years ago, it was somewhere down around 12%. Part of that may be the halo effect from people having iPhones and saying, okay, I'll get a Mac, but also I think part of it is corporate IT environments are loosening up with the ability for employees to actually use Mac OS based devices. Michael, do you see that to be the case, or as you've looked at your analytics, have you seen maybe what we're seeing here as an anomaly with the Mac OS showing up higher on the survey?
Yeah, I did go back again to the Novio analytics and looked at the split of operating system usage. And there it was about 64% Windows, 19% Mac. But that may reflect the fact that, we tend to be in, our viewership tends to be in financial services or in financial functions. And that tends to be more of a Windows environment than a Mac environment.
Okay.
But there's no question that the trend is in the direction that you're describing.
And I think what's interesting there is, it means more IT support from the IT group, but B, it really means that if there are native Zoom apps, Microsoft Teams apps, et cetera, those have to work exactly the same way on both platforms. Because if you're shifting from a Mac OS laptop, say, to a Windows desktop, you want to make sure that your experience, not at the operating system level, but at the application level, is at least consistent between multiples. Eric, do we have, since it seems like we're getting audience feedback in fairly good order, is there anybody asking about or commenting on this specific one?
Someone just commented that primary devices in the corporate space is now laptop for many people, and it will only increase as a hybrid working environment continues to be built out. Mobile isn't really going to take off due to personal privacy concerns. Companies also don't hand mobile phones to everyone, nor do they require their employees to deploy their VPN system on their personal mobile phones unless it's critical to their work.
Well, and I find that quite fascinating, because there had been a huge push a couple of years ago with the bring your own device into the corporate space, at least in particular large public companies, where because they weren't going to hand out smartphones to everybody, they wanted to make sure that you were sandboxing, within the applications on your personal phone. But to the point on the laptop growing, I think that goes back to what we said in the first question there. We'll see a cannibalization of desktop out of, from a media consumption standpoint, pushing more toward laptop. And given the fact that the Mac laptops tend to be a pretty decent quality product, I would suspect, Michael, we may see this number rise. So, right.
And we didn't ask the question about browser on this survey, but while I was looking at the analytics, one thing was notable, whether it's on Windows or on Mac, is the absolute dominance of the Chrome browser at this point for video viewing.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty big shift in the last couple of years as well, because obviously Internet Explorer had the lion's share and Firefox had a fairly robust share, but it does seem that Chrome has become sort of the standard. And I think there's security reasons for that as well. So, all right, Eric, let's jump on to the next one. So here, the question we asked is, do you most often watch an online professional event or an internal enterprise focused event live or time shifted? And the one on the left, to me, I think is actually the most interesting, because online professional events being, professional development, even events like we're hosting today, what we're seeing is a significant number of people are sort of opting not to watch live. And as we get later into the data down here, we'll talk a little bit about why people are saying that. We actually pull some verbatim quotes out of the open-ended text, but that's clearly shifting to a middle ground of some watch live, some watch it time shifted. Part of that may go to not being, the time zone incompatibility, but ultimately, I think part of it goes to the way that people are consuming professional development content. On the right-hand side, internal enterprise events, those are clearly still very much, when the event happens in your organization, you watch it live. Part of that may be the water cooler effect. If you need to know the information so that you can have a competent conversation with somebody else within your organization, you'll tend to watch it live, or if there's an important announcement or something like that. But this surprises me a bit because there had been a trend prior to COVID where there was a bit more on demand. Michael, I don't know if you looked at the analytics in this in your, in Novio and OpenExchange, but do these numbers surprise you, either the online professional events or the internal focused events?
No, not at all. I think that the internal enterprise or organization focused online events tend to be, newsy. They tend to be, kind of time critical, and people are going to be talking about them. Whereas the online professional events tend to be, more less time bound, more casually consumable, and this pretty much reflects what we've seen in webinars over the years as well, that there's about a 60-40 mix of consumption in live versus on-demand versions of webinars. So not surprising at all, but definitely the internal events are live events. I think maybe even the 15% may have to do with time zones, because there are a lot of global companies around who have company meetings that where the Hong Kong crew or the Australia crew doesn't want to be up in the middle of the night viewing it.
Yeah, fair point. All right, let's go on to the next slide here, Eric. So in this one, the question was, how many virtual events or trade shows do you attend during a quarter since the lockdowns began? And what you see here is the largest number is 2 to 5 virtual online events. Again, these are not internal focused events. These are events like what we're doing today. That number is interesting, but what's even more interesting is how many people are saying they're doing more than 10. We've got 22% of the respondents here. Now, granted, this is, this survey went out from streamingmedia.com, so it's sort of focused towards streaming media professionals who are comfortable with watching online content. But still, the more than 10 was actually quite a bit higher than I expected. One of the reasons, and I don't think we necessarily call this out in some of the keynote quotes later on in the presentation, but one of the reasons people said was, look, I can learn about things that may not be part of my normal job. So I'm expanding my knowledge to actually get to the point where I understand areas that I may not normally be able to, to be part of a conversation on. So somebody, say, in sales and marketing, attending an engineering event just to sort of try to understand the language of engineering or programming, or even vice versa, somebody from programming and engineering who says, what do these marketing people talk about when they go to events? They can actually hop onto an event now and sort of see that. Michael, your take on this sort of quantity portion?
Well, still, 6 events a quarter, that's 24 a year, that's one every 2 weeks. That's an awful lot of events. And certainly in-person events didn't have that kind of frequency. So I think that this is good news for the event industry in general, that there is so much interest. One of the things that we are seeing is that there's a lot of kind of event surfing going on, where people aren't, I mean, when you go to a streaming media conference in person, you're going to be there and attending sessions and there for a couple of days maybe, but in this case, the only way to do between 24 and 40 events a year, which is what this suggests, is by doing more surfing and shallower dip-ins.
Well, and also I think it goes back to the point about the time shifted, that say you have multiple events stacked up around the course of a week. So for instance, we have Stream Media East Connect this week, we have Content Delivery Summit next week. That's all paired right in a close period of time. You may not be able to consume all that stuff live. I mean, I feel for Eric, because I know Eric's going to be sitting in front of his iMac for the next couple of days, sort of nonstop dealing with it.
Sleeping here at night. I'm not even moving.
Okay. There we go. So they'll shove food under the door to you. But ultimately, a lot of us don't have that time to sit through the entire event. So I think that's also another reason the time shifting piece is starting to play out.
One other thing I'd say is that in the area of investor events specifically, and we've done 600 of those in the last year, those tend to be high engagement events. Okay. And what we're hearing from people is that when they don't have the overhead of having to travel to an event, or take, especially events, say in Asia, attended by people in the United States, when they don't have that kind of overhead, they actually have a lot more time to attend events and do it in a meaningful way, and not just event surf. So a certain amount of this is about efficiency of attendance, and I think we'll see that a little bit later on in the verbatims.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, as I said before, this went out through streamingmedia.com, but the fact that you're saying even in the financial services sector or investor sector that we're seeing consistency gives me comfort that the data is relevant across a number of different industries. All right, so now we said, okay, great, you go to all these virtual events. Tell us about the most important virtual event that you went to, and give us your sense on how you would rate the experience. A third of the people were neutral. Surprisingly, we had about a third who said, look, it was a frustrating experience, or maybe it got close to the real thing. And then we had a third that said, hey, it's either slightly better, much easier to attend in person, as we talked about, or a new and better way to attend events. To me, what this says, and especially as we looked at the verbatims, was people like the general idea of doing this. They just want it to be as easy as being in person, asking a question, the ability to have a side conversation. And in person, you don't tend to have as many technical issues with audio or video or Zoom dropping out. I mean, where I live rurally on Spectrum, I'm lucky if it holds consistently through 2 or 3 hours of Zoom events, let alone an entire day. Michael, what's your take on this particular one, with people saying, look, my most important event was at best neutral and sometimes highly frustrating?
It's really interesting. We've actually seen a shift among our clients over time about kind of what their ambitions are and expectations for the virtual events. If you went 12 months ago, most of the clients were saying, well, how close can we get to the in-person experience. How can we live up to that experience? Now they have actually changed their focus to say, how can we use the online medium to actually make the experience better? How can we use the analytics? How can we use the personalization? How can we use the time shifting? How can we actually increase the production values associated with these things? How can we use the interactivity to actually make these events better? And so I think that what you're going to see here in all events in the future is trying to say, how can you make it better than an in-person event? And that's going to be really, really important, as a lot of these events go to hybrid formats that have both in-person and virtual components.
And you don't want the virtual part to be what it used to be, which was like a camera stuck off to the side with really bad audio and video that felt like you were sitting in the furthest part of the room attending the event.
Right. And I think what happened early on when people made the shift to virtual events, there was the novelty factor of, let's try to build in these virtual vendor booths and let's try to build in virtual networking. And those, I think, were the components that attendees found the most frustrating. And I think there's been a return to focusing on, let's make the core of the event, delivering the conversations and the presentations and letting the audience interact, and focus on that. And that leads us into that interaction component, leads us into this next slide, Tim.
Okay, sure. And Michael, did you have anything else to add? I know Eric jumped in.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
All right. So here we said, okay, if you have a large scale internal or external event, have you ever used a solution that uses something like bidirectional, whether it's video conferencing, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, for a small group of participants, the ones who actually need to participate, and then used a live streaming component for the larger group of people who participate? The reason this question came up for me and why I wanted to include it in the survey had to do with the fact that my wife and I bought a farm, and we were attending an online event on how to become new farmers. One of the things was around beekeeping, and what the local group found was when they sent it out, they had a license for 100 on Zoom, and they had 600 people who wanted to attend. And I had a conversation with them and said, look, make sure you also do a YouTube live component, because there are only a certain number of people who A, can get in, B, who are really going to actively participate, and C, you don't want to pay all that extra money to try to get a license for 1,000 on Zoom versus doing it this way. So this doesn't, that was my gut feel, was that it might be something that people have done, and it doesn't surprise me that essentially 2/3 of our respondents said, yes, we do this, and we do it for internal, external, or for a combination of both. Michael, with what you all do, I mean, is this model sort of similar, because customers would get sticker shock if they had 700 people, on a Zoom or on whatever platform you would be helping them with?
Well, we get them the audience however we need to, and we end up paying for it, and generally, in the financial services business, there's a little bit less price sensitivity if they're reaching serious investors. But this has become the predominant mode of live streaming for us. It's the virtual equivalent of a studio audience. So for example, with company presentations at investor conferences, where we might have a couple of company executives and a panel of analysts and a moderator, and then we live stream it over Novio to a much larger investor audience, and then gather Q&A in. So it really has become the predominant approach that we're using.
Good.
And it's interesting for that outside of the investor community and in settings where cost is more of a factor. That streaming out to something like YouTube Live or Facebook Live is also effective for those attendees who, as Tim mentioned earlier, may not have the reliable bandwidth or connectivity. It's much easier for them to watch on YouTube and know that they're going to be able to watch the stream than to sometimes deal with the bandwidth of Zoom or another platform.
Yeah, because it's probably fairly embarrassing to keep dropping out of a Zoom call and back
Right.
into a Zoom call and that kind of thing. Definitely. So Eric, I know we're going to be shifting to a different group of slides here. Is there any audience feedback that we need to address on this past group of slides?
There is a question asking, how does the consumption split for business users compare over the last 2 to 3 years? That came about 9:15, so I think that has to do with devices. And I think we addressed that, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. I mean, I don't think we have longitudinal data on that. That's something certainly as we go forward with the enterprise video survey, for the next couple of years, we'll be looking to see whether that split continues. So let's go ahead and go on then to the next slide where we're talking about attending events. So this again asks sort of 2 questions, but both around in the future. Will you personally be attending more or fewer virtual conferences and events or in-person meetings at your corporate office? And this was asking respondents to tell us about what they themselves expected that they would have to be doing. Many more and few more obviously are quite low. So to me, it feels like when we're talking about sort of that $100 million answer, that the in-person events will not quite rise over the course of the next 18 months. And that there's still a lot of uncertainty around this when people personally are saying, look, we don't know. But what is quite interesting to me is that virtual conferences seem to maintain their staying power. So if we take the 3 to the left, many more, a few more, and about the same, that's actually a rise in the number of virtual events that people are saying they're going to attend. Now, we haven't parsed this down to say, is this the people who say, look, I'm attending an event every 2 weeks and I'm going to increase it to every week? Or is this people who are saying, look, if I have the choice between doing an in-person or doing it remotely, I'll choose to do it remotely. But it still tells us that the pendulum may not swing back quite as far as we expect. Having said that, let me caveat to say we're asking about this in 18 months. Michael, you're of course in an industry where a number of the major banks have said to their employees, you will show back up to work in a certain period of time, in the next few months. So we may see a pendulum swing heavy for a couple months, but I think that overall it may come back to this sort of midpoint where virtual events and in-person events are relatively consistent. What's your sense on that?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of uncertainty around this, and I think one of the challenges is that many enterprises haven't settled on a post-COVID kind of office policy. There are an awful lot of companies that are giving employees choices about kind of work from home or kind of work a couple of days a week in the office versus working full time. And so, I think that if you have mixed groups of people who are, remote and in the office, that, you're still going to see a whole lot of virtual meetings going on there. But with respect to virtual conferences and events, I think, business travel is going to be slower than consumer travel coming back, but it will come back. I think international travel will be a whole lot slower. And so, if you have to travel internationally to get to these in-person events. That's going to keep a virtual component for any conference that has attendees from overseas.
And I would add to that, I think the massive amount of uncertainty that if you buy a ticket and you're planning to attend that trade show, and then 14 days before you go, the country in which it's hosted shifts the model as to what needs to happen for quarantine, et cetera. That seems like we're going to continue to have that. I mean, we've seen pockets around the world where the restrictions were eased in terms of quarantining, and then they've come right back. If you're a business person planning a non-essential business, when I say non-essential business travel, not something that you absolutely have to do for work, I do think that uncertainty is actually going to maintain quite consistently. The next question was, okay, we asked you personally. Now we're going to ask about your company's approach. And what we asked is, today, do you, in other words, during the lockdowns, and then 18 months from now, what is the utilization of streaming? Not surprising that today and in the last year, the utilization of streaming has jumped up, the much more at 61%, the less than before at 1%. So clearly that piece, and that's not really news. What is interesting on this is when we ask people to say 18 months from now, there seems to actually be a gain in the use of streaming for online and internal events, because a bit more and much more are rising into the 18 months forwards from now rather than dropping off. Again, this sort of reiterates what was said in the previous slide, but this is looking at it from an organizational standpoint. Michael, anything else to add on this particular slide?
Let's face it, viewing video for enterprise applications has become, part of people's habit patterns, and it will just increase.
And then on this slide, where we're now saying, look, what about in-person meetings? Clearly, people are expecting that their companies are going to have fewer in-person meetings than they had prior to the lockdowns. So if we take in all three of those charts, what it seems to show me is that we have, we've increased the use through COVID. We actually expect that we may not have a drop in that use post-COVID, and that actually people would be more likely to want to go to virtual events as opposed to in-person events. Eric, Michael, am I reading that right, wrong?
Seems pretty straightforward to me, yeah.
Yep.
Well, and so what that says for our industry, the streaming industry, is we've been busy. We've been really busy these last 15 months. We're not maybe going to get the break that we expected. And to a certain extent, we're getting what we asked for, which was we wanted people to use, whether it's for personal consumption of OTT entertainment, or whether it's live events like this, or even houses of worship and like that. We want people to use what we sell. And apparently they not only are, they're going to continue to use. So it actually makes the future fairly bright from a streaming industry standpoint.
And now we can talk about exactly what people have been using. So let's take a look at this. Zoom is far and away the leader, but Tim and Michael, can we talk a little bit about this breakdown of what platforms, products, and services people are using?
Michael, I'm going to let you go first, because you deal with a number of these different, solutions. As you say, you get the audience where it is. What is your general sense in the way that the industry is moving? Are we going more fragmented with multiple different options for people to use in corporate environments?
Well, I think that one of the things that has happened, traditionally is that a lot of large enterprises, especially in financial services, have restrictions against using certain platforms. they've really been optimized around, room-based video conferencing systems, largely internally. But as the restrictions got relaxed out of necessity, Zoom got fairly quick approval. But Microsoft Teams definitely, we're seeing momentum around Microsoft Teams as a challenger, and the rest of these look just about right.
And it's interesting that you mentioned Teams, because when we did this 4 years ago, I don't even think Teams was on the list at that point. There was Google Hangouts, I think, which of course is ultimately morphed into Google Meet. And what I find surprising, so in the last couple of days, as we've been running to the Stream Media East event, the Connect event, and me talking to a number of different panelists for different panels I'm going to moderate, I've had to make sure that I have Teams and Zoom up to date, because some people want to use Zoom, some people want to use Teams, and I have to make sure that, that I've got a device with me that can actually use Google Meet, because there are others who want to use that. To me, it's sort of surprising that WebEx has dropped off as rapidly as it has, but we're still in a fragmented landscape that if you want to conduct business with multiple people in different corporations, you have to be willing to move back and forth between these platforms. One concern I have is that there's not sort of a unified platform that we've come to, and therefore, if I, as a corporation that uses Microsoft Teams, wants to talk to somebody who's in an organization that uses Zoom, whose corporate policy wins out as to what solution we use, or do we just pick up our phones and do FaceTime between each other?
Actually, you engage OpenExchange, because that is a part of what OpenExchange does, which is connecting Zoom calls to WebEx calls and Teams people in, from diverse incompatible platforms into single meetings.
Nice.
Tim, we've got, we're coming up already on 12 minutes left in the hour. And so I would like to ask you and Michael, do we want to jump ahead to a particular set of slides at this moment? And we need to move relatively quickly through what we have left.
Let us jump ahead to companies' use of enterprise video really quick.
Okay, tell me when to stop, because as I'm sharing slides, I cannot see the
slide
number.
right there. So
Okay.
This one says, beyond the traditional solutions, what do you use, to sort of complement your enterprise video? Facebook Live, LinkedIn video sort of surprised me. It's risen from sort of nowhere to actually being a contender in the live video space. And then YouTube doesn't surprise me, because YouTube has been repurposed multiple times for for use, especially now in live events. Michael, do you have any quick comments on this one?
All I'd say is that I think part of the distinction here is the use of video for kind of finding new people, or video as a search engine, if you will, versus supplementing live streamed events and the like. YouTube as a search engine is outstanding, but from a brand control standpoint, it can be iffy, right?
Well, and you bring up a good point, which we may not get time to see in the verbatims, but navigation was one of the #1 issues that people had, not just in finding prior content, but even navigation in the live event. And Michael, I know one of the things that we were going to talk about there was live DVR. If somebody comes into a meeting 10 minutes late, can they watch from the beginning of the event, or are they stuck at the moment now and they have to wait till the on-demand version comes out? And you mentioned, of course, I think OpenExchange does a live DVR functionality.
Yeah, we have a feature called Never Late, where you have the choice when you come in 10 minutes late of viewing from the beginning versus viewing in progress, and even catching up with kind of extra speed or speed boost to the live event, and then keeping everything in sync, synchronized slides and footnotes and captions and all that stuff.
And that indeed leads as a nice segue to the slide we'll end on here, which is when we ask people, current features in their EVP, their enterprise video platform, versus desired features over the next 18 months, we talked at the top of the hour that people have frustration in being able to ask questions. In fact, several of the verbatims, people said, if I'd known I wasn't going to be able to ask questions or my questions wouldn't get answered, I probably would not have watched live. I would have watched it on demand. But other people also said it's awkward to submit questions because you don't know whether they're going to turn your camera on and suddenly ask you to ask the question, or whether they're just going to read the question like we're doing here. Synchronized slides you mentioned as well, that's continues to be a really big feature. And then this navigation portion, where someone wants to be able to jump to agenda points or wants to be able to jump to key topics within an actual event. And this, of course, would be for on-demand content. Why don't, Michael, I'll give you the last word on this, and then we're going to turn it back over to Eric and see if there are any questions.
On these things, I always look at two things. One is kind of the height of the bars, but the second is the gaps between what they have and what's desired. And you identified an important one, which was the catch-up service. But the other thing is searchable transcripts. And one of the places that is advancing pretty rapidly is live transcripting and live translation, and being able to use that kind of catch up or never late feature to go back conceivably to parts of the live stream based on what's been said.
Very good. Eric, turn it back to you.
Yeah, we do have one question in the chat, and if you do have questions for any of us, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. Mark DeJong, who is going to be speaking at the Content Delivery Summit next week, has the dreaded, I joke, more a comment than a question, but pretty sure that single focus apps like Zoom, Teams, and Meet for employee engagements for larger scale meetings will go down and shift to meeting platforms with more bells and whistles and the ability to include company branding. The quote unquote standard tools will remain, but will be used more for smaller meetings and video conferencing, but the big events will be taken to other types of platforms, enterprise video platforms, I believe. Michael, your thoughts on that?
I think that's right, but I think that a lot of these platforms get used in combination, as we said. So very often what we're doing is we're using a medium like Zoom or WebEx or some combination using OpenExchange on the front end for managing, kind of putting the speakers and panelists together, but then bringing it out to a live streamed audience with a lot more of the bells and whistles and synchronized slides and footnotes and navigation and catch up and all that stuff.
And I also think, Eric, there's that expediency factor. We had to use these because people in the past could walk down the hall to the conference room that had the room-based video conferencing system and attach in easily to an enterprise video platform. Suddenly you've got thousands of employees at home and you don't really have a solution that's designed for that. So you go with what's out there in the market. I think that it's not necessarily that it's going to be used for small meetings as it's going to be used for ad hoc meetings. If it's scheduled, everybody goes through the corporate policy. If it's unscheduled or ad hoc, you have to use a solution like OpenExchange or someone else like that to deal very rapidly with it. And then you figure out whether that's going to be the consistent model going forward or whether you're going to go back to your corporate policy approach.
I also think that there's a big difference between internal meetings and cross-organization meetings. And a challenge that still exists out there is that corporate firewall policies and corporate usage policies are are basically dictate that these platforms are more suitable for use kind of internally than across organizations, because penetrating that firewall is actually something that has taken us 10 years to kind of figure out how to make a seamless integration of a Zoom call, a WebEx call, and a Cisco telepresence room, and make it all feel like one call.
It was so much easier back in the ISDN video conferencing days where you just dialed into an MCU and it didn't matter what you had because interoperability worked. But fair. All right, Eric.
Absolutely. The only other questions we had are from people who are interested in seeing this data after this presentation. And this presentation will be available on the Streaming Media YouTube channel within a day or two. Someone asked if they could see the slides, and boy, we didn't get to all of our slides. So we are going to be publishing a full research report within a few weeks that includes all of this data. And I will explore and discuss with Michael, whether or not we can send these slides out to everyone who attended this presentation before then. We can talk about that, and if that's possible, we'll do so. Otherwise, keep an eye on your email if you're attending this, or even for folks who just registered and didn't get a chance to attend live, they will receive an email notifying them immediately when that research report is available. So this has been terrific. And this is just the first of many Streaming Media East Connect sessions. So thank you so much, Tim, and thank you so much, Michael, for helping us kick things off in such an intriguing and compelling way.
A pleasure.
All right.
COVID-19 has posed a unique series of challenges and opportunities for the investor relations community. It's remarkable. Now more than ever, investor information has kept moving, and the resilience and transparency of the world's public companies has set a new standard for decades to come. Public and private companies who've started virtualizing their roadshows, investor days, and earnings calls noticed something remarkable when they did. Remote attendance skyrocketed. Meeting efficiency increased. Deals closed in record time, all while maintaining unparalleled investor relationships. So now the question becomes, how will companies continue to reap the full benefits of video and virtual meetings and conferences to foster richer, more interactive investor communications? The answer lies with a uniquely specialized partner like OpenExchange, the premier provider of video solutions for the financial industry. OpenExchange is the essential platform to host, manage, and improve Investor Day sessions, quarterly earnings announcements, annual meetings, and non-deal roadshows. Our advanced technology and experienced video specialists ensure secure, reliable connections regardless of technology or location. Our live and on-demand video streaming delivers company information and insight to tens of thousands of simultaneous viewers. And our network of more than 100,000 endpoints means we can originate video meetings, streams, and even complex conferences from anywhere in the world. Secure, reliable, trusted. That's what makes OpenExchange the premier video partner for the world's largest financial institutions. And it's what keeps the world's investor communications flowing face-to-face, even when face-to-face isn't possible.